Today, we're diving into a case that absolutely shocked the nation. It all unfolded inside the supposedly secure walls of one of the world's most prestigious universities. This is the story of the murder of Annie Lee, a story about an incredible future that was tragically cut short, and a mystery that started in a place you'd never, ever expect. So picture this. It's September 2009. A young, incredibly brilliant PhD student at Yale University named Annie Lee is about to start this amazing new chapter in her life. She is literally just 5 days away from her wedding day, and then she vanishes, just gone without a trace. And right from the very beginning, investigators were stumped by this bizarre mystery. I mean, the building she worked in was a fortress, cameras everywhere. They had footage that clearly showed her walking in one morning, but there was zero evidence of her ever walking out. To really understand the weight of this loss, you have to know who Annie Lee was. She wasn't just any student. She was a truly brilliant mind with such an incredible future ahead of her. I mean, this scale of her accomplishments was just staggering. Annie was her high school's valedictorian. She earned over $160,000 in scholarships to go to college. Then she gets to Yale to pursue her doctorate. And her research was so important. She was focused on finding treatments for diabetes and cancer, all while planning her wedding to the love of her life. You know, back in high school, her classmates voted her most likely to be the next Einstein. Think about that. It's a heartbreaking detail that shows you the immense potential the world lost. And this timeline, wow, it just puts the tragedy into such sharp focus. She disappears on September 8th. And then 5 days later, on September 13th, the very day she was supposed to be walking down the aisle, that's the day they found her body. It's just unbelievably tragic. So this brings us to the investigation itself. It quickly turned into this bizarre, modern-day, locked room mystery, all contained within the high-security walls of a Yale research building. Okay, get this. The building where Annie worked was monitored by about 75 security cameras. It was designed to be this incredibly secure environment, which, only made the mystery of how someone could just vanish inside even deeper. And this was the central problem for investigators, right? The cameras were their most important clue and their biggest dead end all at once. They proved she was inside, but gave them no answers about what happened next. The only possible conclusion was that the entire building was the crime scene. Police knew that to even get into the lab, you needed a Yale ID card. So right away, they knew the suspect had to be an insider. And soon, their search of the building started uncovering these horrific clues. First, they found bloody clothes stashed above a ceiling tile. And then, finally, they found Annie's body, hidden inside a utility chase in a basement wall. The Connecticut Medical Examiner's report was definitive. Annie Lee's death was ruled a homicide, and the cause was traumatic asphyxia from neck compression. With the search now narrowed down to insiders who had access to that lab, the investigation very quickly zeroed in on one of her colleagues. It's kind of wild to think about. The victim and the perpetrator, they worked in the exact same professional space. Annie Lee, this brilliant PhD student doing vital research, and Raymond Clark III, a lab technician whose job was to clean those same lab spaces and the animal cages. They literally worked side by side, day in and day out. The police work here was just so methodical. They cross-referenced the keycard access logs with who was in the building at the time. Raymond Clark's name popped up as a person of interest. Once they got a warrant and collected his DNA, the evidence was overwhelming. And on September 17th, just 4 days after Annie's body was found, Clark was arrested. But the arrest wasn't the end of the story. The legal part that followed took a very specific path, with a plea deal that ultimately let Annie's family avoid a painful and really long trial. So here's how it all shook out in court. For the murder charge, Raymond Clark pleaded guilty, straight up admitted to the crime. But for a second charge, attempted sexual assault, he entered something called an Alford plea. So you're probably asking, what on earth is an Alford plea? Well, it's a really fascinating bit of legal footwork. Basically, the defendant says, I'm not admitting I did this, but they do admit that the prosecution has enough evidence to convict them. It's a way of accepting the punishment without admitting to the act itself. In exchange for these pleas, Raymond Clark was sentenced to 44 years in prison. And at his sentencing, he did express remorse, but he offered no motive, no explanation for his horrific actions.
So finally, let's just step back a second and look at why this case resonated so deeply across the entire country. The murder of Annie Lay wasn't just some local crime story, it became a national obsession.
The media attention was just intense. News outlets at the time called it frenetic. News crews from all over descended on New Haven. And for weeks, you couldn't get away from the story. But what was it about this specific case that grabbed everyone's attention? Well, this quote from Slate magazine at the time offers a pretty blunt explanation. The commentator, Jack Schaefer, pointed out this kind of unspoken rule in journalism. The prestige of the location just amplifies the coverage. The fact that this happened at Yale to a brilliant student made it a much, much bigger story than a similar tragedy might have been somewhere else. And that really leaves us with a final lingering question, doesn't it? The story of Annie Lee is a profound personal tragedy, for sure. But its place in the national spotlight forces us to think about what we, as a society, pay attention to. Why do some stories become massive national headlines while others barely make the local news? It's a question about media, about society, and about our own focus. And it's definitely something worth thinking about long after the headlines have faded away.